I love the stories of the Old Testament, stories of the heroes of the faith. I love the stories about women who are bold, like Deborah and Esther. And yet I've always been drawn to the story of Ruth and the gentleness and the faithfulness that are found in the midst of tragedy and trial. When I read the story, I can't help but picture it and play it out like a stage play in my mind. Let's take that journey together. Whether this is the first time you're hearing the story or the 50th, listen for what God wants to speak to you as we experience the drama of the book of Ruth. Act 1. Act 1 sets the stage and introduces us to the characters and their plight. The narrator tells us it's the days when the judges ruled. We're in Old Testament times. Creation, Noah, Abraham, Joseph, Moses, those times have passed. Joshua has led the Israelites into the promised land, but he too dies. This story takes place in the peak era of the judges who ruled Israel before they demanded that God give them a king. And there is famine in the lands of God's people. Many are forced to venture into the lands of the surrounding tribes. And this is what happens to Elimelech, his wife Naomi, and their 2 sons. Originally from Bethlehem, they're forced to settle in the land belonging to the tribe of Moab. Elimelech dies sometime after reaching Moab, and Naomi is left with only her 2 sons, who both marry local Moabite women, Orpah and Ruth. Now, the Israelites had some issues with the people of Moab in the past, problems such as the Moabites convincing them to worship false gods and idols. But here there seems to be no issue. After 10 years of living in Moab, the 2 sons die, and we pick up the story with a scene between Naomi and her daughters-in-law. Naomi has lost everything. Her husband is dead, and her 2 sons as well. There is nothing to stay in Moab for, no protection for her. So Naomi decides to set out and return to Bethlehem because she has heard news that God has given his people food and that the famine has ended. She takes her son's 2 wives along with her. Well, the women don't get far when Naomi begins to think through what it will mean for these women to come with her. In Moab, they have their families and a chance at marrying again and starting a family of their own. Marriage was the only career open to women in the ancient Near East. Naomi's looking out for the best interests of these women when she tells them, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home." Both women weep and say that they will go with Naomi. But Naomi explains herself further. "I'm not going to have more sons. Go home where you will have a chance at happiness. The Lord is turning against me. I have nothing left but bitterness." The women weep again, but finally Orpah kisses Naomi and turns back. Ruth, on the other hand, clings to Naomi and cries forth powerfully poetic words that many of us are familiar with. "Don't force me to leave you. Don't make me go home. Where you go, I will go. Where you live, I will live. Your people are my people. Your God is my God. Where you die, I'll die, and that's where I'll be buried. So help me God, not even death itself is going to come between us." Naomi sees the determination in Ruth and hears in her voice the yearning, and so she says no more. The curtain drops and rises to a scene of Naomi and Ruth entering Bethlehem together. The people of the town are curious when they see Naomi and Ruth coming into Bethlehem. No doubt they were travel-worn. Traveling from one side of the Dead Sea to another is no small feat. But it seems that they could also see the pain and the anguish on Naomi's face. When asked by the people if she is Naomi returning home, she replies, "Don't call me Naomi. Call me bitter. The strong one has dealt me a bitter blow. I left here full of life, and God has brought me back with nothing but the clothes on my back. Why would you call me Naomi? God certainly doesn't. The strong one ruined me." And so an embittered Naomi, whose name means sweetness, returned to Bethlehem along with her daughter-in-law Ruth, the Moabite. The narrator closes this opening act with the words, "The barley harvest is beginning." End scene. So here we have Naomi returning to her homeland, to a life of loneliness and despair, but she is not alone. Her daughter-in-law, Ruth, who is repeatedly referred to as a Moabite, lest we forget that she is a foreigner, is with her. We still have yet to discover what role Ruth is going to play in the story, but the stage is set. The barley harvest is beginning. Before the curtain rises, the narrator gives us some behind-the-scenes information and tells us of a rich man related to Naomi's husband Elimelech. His name is Boaz. The curtain rises, Act 2. Ruth and Naomi are living in Bethlehem, but they have little or no food. So Ruth says to Naomi, I'm going out to work. I'm going to glean among the sheaves, following after some harvester who will treat me kindly. Naomi gives Ruth her blessing, and Ruth goes to the field to glean behind the reapers. Now we hear the narrator's voice from off stage. It just so happened that the field in which Ruth went to glean belongs to Boaz. We're starting to get excited now. We're going to find out who this Boaz character is that the narrator foreshadowed earlier. But we have to remember that Ruth is completely unaware of who he is. She continues to glean, picking up the bits of barley dropped by the field workers. Enter Boaz from stage left. He hails his workers. The Lord be with you. The Lord bless you, they reply. He claps his arm around his foreman and points to Ruth in the field. Who is that young woman? That is Ruth, the woman from Moab who came back with Naomi. She came and begged to glean in the field, and she's been out there on her feet with no break since very early this morning. Boaz approaches Ruth to speak with her. Obviously, by now, she's realized that he's the master of the field. The servants around her are all whispering. I imagine that she is a bit nervous. His words quickly reassure her. Listen, my daughter, from now on, don't go into any other field to glean. Stay right here in this one, and stay close to my young women. Watch where they are harvesting, and follow them. Don't worry about a thing. I've given orders to my servants not to harass you. When you are thirsty, feel free to go and drink from the water buckets that the servants have filled. Oh, Ruth is so surprised that she falls down on his feet and cries, How does this happen that you should pick me out and to treat me so kindly? Me, a foreigner. He replies, I've heard all about you. Heard about the way that you treated your mother-in-law after the death of her husband, and how you left your father and mother and the land of your birth, and have come to live among a bunch of total strangers. God reward you well for what you've done, and with a generous bonus besides from God to whom you've come, seeking protection under his wings. She lifts her face to look at him and says, Oh, sir, such grace, such kindness. I don't deserve it. You've touched my heart, treated me like one of your own, and I don't even belong here. When it's time for lunch, Boaz invites Ruth to join them, and he gives her food and drink. She even has leftovers. When Ruth goes back to work, Boaz orders his servants, let her glean where there's still plenty of grain on the ground. Make it easier for her. Better yet, put some of the good stuff out and leave it for her to glean. Give her special treatment. And so that night, when Ruth beat out all the barley that she had gathered, she had almost a sack full. When she returned home and showed Naomi, her mother-in-law, asked her where she had gleaned that day. Ruth tells Naomi about everything that happened and that Boaz was the man in whose field she had worked. Naomi gets excited and jumps up and down, praising God. She tells Ruth that Boaz is related to them and is in fact a close relative, a kinsman redeemer. He has the legal right to redeem the land which belonged to Naomi's husband Elimelech. Ruth relayed the information from Boaz to glean only in his field, and Naomi encourages Ruth to do just that. She assures her that Boaz will protect her. And so at the end of Act 2, we find Ruth continuing to glean in the fields of Boaz through both the barley and the wheat harvests. The narrator's final words before the curtain drops are, and Ruth continued to live with Naomi. Now, Boaz's invitation to Ruth was a turning point for her. This is the first cheerful thing to happen since her husband's death. exile, and poverty. Things are looking up for her and Naomi. Act 3 opens with Naomi voicing her concern to Ruth about her daughter-in-law's security. She knows she won't be around forever, and she wants to provide for Ruth when she is gone, so she shares her plan. Isn't Boaz our close relative? Maybe it's time we make our move. Tonight is the night of Boaz's barley harvest at the threshing floor. Take a bath, put on some perfume, get all dressed up and go to the threshing floor. But don't let him know you are there until the party is well underway and he's had plenty of food and drink. When you see him slipping off to sleep, watch where he lies down and then go there. Lie at his feet and let him know that you are available to him for marriage. Then wait and see what he will do. He will tell you what to do. Ruth promises Naomi that she will do as she is told and follow her instructions. Ruth exits stage right to prepare herself. In the next scene, we see the curtain rise on a sleeping Boaz. We catch a glimpse of Ruth moving in the shadows. The lights brighten, and we watch as Ruth uncovers Boaz's feet and curls up. Now, we in our postmodern times are quite good at reading into stories and suspecting ulterior motives for these characters. But we have to understand that that's generally not the way that Hebrew narratives work. This is a story of ordinary people doing ordinary things in a worthy way. At midnight, Boaz wakes up and sees the figure lying at his feet, asks, "Who are you?" "I am Ruth, your maiden. Take me under your protecting wing. You're my close relative, you know. In the circle of covenant redeemers, you do have the right to marry me." He says, "God bless you, my dear daughter. What a splendid expression of love. And when you could have had your pick of any of the young men around. And now, my dear daughter, don't worry about anything. I'll do all you could want or ask. Everybody in town knows what a courageous woman you are. A real prize. You're right. I am a close relative, but there is one closer than I am. So stay the rest of the night. In the morning, if he wants to exercise his customary rights and responsibilities as the closest covenant redeemer, he'll have his chance. But if he isn't interested, as God lives, I'll do it. Now go back to sleep until morning." Ruth slept at his feet until dawn, but she got up while it was still dark and wouldn't be recognized. Then Boaz said, "No one must know that you came to the threshing floor." He then had her bring her cloak, and he filled it with barley. Ruth returns to Naomi and tells her that Boaz would not let her leave without bringing food to Naomi. Naomi tells Ruth to be patient, that Boaz will surely settle the matter that very day. Act 3 closes on an expectant Ruth and a very excited Naomi. Boaz acts honorably in his desire to have Ruth leave before someone can gossip about her presence. He is truly flattered with her wish to marry him, as news of her good character has spread throughout the town and many young suitors could be lining up. Act 4 opens in the public arena. We find Boaz at the city gate, where all the legal business occurred in those times. People of Bethlehem are in the background, going about their business. Boaz raises his hand in greeting to a man that we learn is the closer kin he told Ruth about at the threshing floor. He invites the man and some elders to sit with him for the proceedings. He informs the man that Naomi has property which needs to be redeemed so it isn't lost to the family. He also lets the man know he is next in line if the man refuses. The man quickly agrees to redeem the land. In doing so, he will extend his own holdings. Boaz continues, "You realize, don't you, that when you buy the field from Naomi, you also get Ruth the Moabite, the widow of our dead relative, along with the redeemer responsibilities with her to have children and to carry on the family inheritance." Then the relative said, "Oh, no, I can't do that. I'd jeopardize my own family inheritance. You go ahead and buy it. You can have my rights. I can't do it." The men ratify the legal agreement in a strange sandal ceremony in which Boaz removes his sandal and gives it to the relative. He then speaks, "You are all witnesses today that I have bought from Naomi everything that belonged to Elimelech and their sons, including responsibility for Ruth, the foreigner. I'll take her as my wife and keep the name of her deceased husband alive along with his inheritance. The memory and reputation of her husband is not going to disappear out of this family or from his hometown. To all of this, you are witnesses this very today. All the people who were in the square responded, "Yes, we are witnesses. May God make this woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, the two women who built the family of Israel. With the children God gives you from Ruth, may your family rival the family of Perez, the son Tamar bore to Judah." The curtain drops, then rises on the scene of Ruth and Boaz's wedding. The curtain falls again, only to open on the scene of Boaz and Ruth holding a child. Naomi is ecstatic and takes him from Ruth, cradling him. The women of the town approach her, shouting, "Blessed be God! He didn't leave you without family to carry on. May this baby grow up to be famous in Israel. He'll make you young again. He'll take care of you in your old age. And this daughter-in-law who brought him into the world and loves you so much, why, she is worth more than 7 sons." The curtain drops for a final time, and the narrator appears with his last words. The neighborhood women started calling him Naomi's baby boy, but his real name was Obed. Obed was the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of David. The house lights go up. The show has ended. What a beautiful story. A simple, beautiful story. A son born out of bizarre circumstances to a foreign woman becomes the grandfather of Israel's greatest king. Ruth, a foreigner, becomes grafted into the family tree that eventually leads to Jesus, the Messiah. God is not a direct character, but we see his work throughout the scenes. Naomi recognizes and calls out God's involvement in every aspect of her life. She cries out in bitterness to him and invokes his blessing on those around her. She gives thanks when provision is made. Naomi has moved from death to life. The despair of the first act is turned to joy when she has an heir and finds herself once again part of a family. Boaz didn't know when he spoke God's blessing over Ruth the first day that he saw her in the fields, that he himself would be the instrument God used in bringing about that very blessing that he spoke of. He becomes the advocate for the poor, the widow, and the foreigner, even when he has nothing to gain from doing so. He demonstrates what the text calls loving kindness, which really means a kindness that goes beyond what is expected. Through Boaz, Ruth finds the protection she needs as a foreigner in Israel. God is the God who makes provision for the stranger, the outcast, the foreigner. He is involved with each character in the story individually, as families, as a community, and as a nation. He makes a way for the poor and the widow to be helped through the law. He looks past all appearances and redeems the helpless. God's purpose is accomplished through faithful, yet ordinary individuals. In Ruth, we have an example of simply living life with integrity and looking out for those around us. Her decision to follow Naomi to Bethlehem is one of sacrifice. Adventure does await. We are called to an epic life, but that life may mean being faithful in what we are given. When we are committed to his service, there are no insignificant moments, choices, or turns. Every part of life is sacred. I want to live my life in a way that reflects commitment to a God who makes provision for those that the world pushes aside. A God who cares about the widows and provides a way for strangers to be grafted into his family. The book of Ruth doesn't allow us to be left out. The characters are by no means pillars of the faith that we think of. And yet here in this little book, in the midst of God's story, is redemption. Ruth was an outsider. She wasn't born into the faith, and yet she came to find herself, as Eugene Peterson writes, gathered into a story and given a quiet and obscure part that proved critical to the way everything turned out. She was the great-grandmother of King David. It truly is a story of God making things new, of mourning turning into dancing, tears to laughter. It doesn't romanticize life. It hits us where many of us are and reminds us that God's ways are not our ways. However out of place we may feel, we count. We matter. Every last one of us. Thank you.